Hello, this is Jeff Nyquist with another edition of Friends and Enemies. With me is my co-host Alex Benesch in Germany. I'm in the United States. And of course, we talk about friends and enemies, allies and enemies. This has been an interesting week for NATO. Germany has been asked to mobilize 7 brigades, 40,000 troops to the Baltic states. They already have a brigade there. I believe it's a Panzer brigade. And that would just about double the defensive strength of the Baltic states. Of course, it's removing those divisions from Germany if the main path of Russian advance is through Poland into Germany. Of course, nobody thinks that Russia's militarily ready or in a condition to advance very far into Poland. But my work with Johnny Anderson and Lee Wheelbarger shows a big buildup in Belarus by the Russians and in Russia. And there's even been movements of HIMARS from the Polish army to Finland. There's been the New York Times covered the buildup on the Finnish border. Where is Russia getting all this military equipment from? And reviewing all the infrastructure construction, the continuous building of helipads and bunkers and S-400 surface-to-air missile sites. And the movement of now we see there are SS-27 road mobile ICBMs in Kaliningrad, that far west, in a little Russian enclave between Lithuania and Poland. So this is amongst the news, but the thing I'd like to go back and forth with Alex about is that Trump did this tweet on Truth Social, and I'm going to read it. And there's been a back and forth between Putin and Trump. The bromance between the two seems to be over. But here's what Trump tweeted. This is part of the tweet he did against Putin. Trump said, "I've always had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin of Russia, but something has happened to him. He has gone absolutely crazy. He is needlessly killing lots of people, and I'm not just talking about soldiers. Missiles and drones are being shot into cities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. He just noticed this."
Well,
and the Russians, I'll just finish with this. The Russians are shooting back at Trump, rhetorically speaking, calling him a taco. A taco? It means Trump always chickens out. And they're laughing at him. So, and Trump has not had the nerve to put sanctions on Russia yet. So what do you say, Alex?
well, if the thing about Donald Trump's language is he's the master of getting under people's skin, right? I mean, Trump understands other people.
Well, that kind of thing.
When it comes to
a taco, yeah, it's like that.
Well, when it comes to
his skin.
Well, I mean, sometimes a shark recognizes a shark, or somebody who's game, recognizes somebody else who's game, and the psychological barbs. And Trump has had multi-decades experience of
Trump is much better at this game.
Getting under other people's skin, and just put the needle where it hurts. Now, on the surface,
rocket man.
I mean, that was even overt. I mean, it's like I think you gotta read into the subtext, where the real needling takes place.
Is he gonna call him Little Vladimir next?
I think he did something better than that, because if the subtext of what Trump has been saying for the last days or maybe a week or two, it's kind of brilliant if you think about it, because when you say, it's not my war over there, when Trump says something like that, it's not, I didn't start this thing. It's not high on my agenda. It's basically saying I have more important things to do. Now, I believe that Trump is taking this war seriously, but what he's saying is, I'm so above that. It's like one of these things on my agenda. It's not even high on my agenda. It's like, yeah, I get pestered about it. I gave the Russians a good deal offer, but something's happened to Putin. He's kind of losing it. He's getting old, and he's doing something that's not even important. I mean, this is how you hurt somebody psychologically, like Vladimir Putin. I mean, Trump has done this against many people over the span of his career. Just devaluing an opponent especially with subtext, by just hitting the other guy where it hurts. You know, like, this other guy he's not that important. I have more important things to do. You know, it's like, yeah, he's kind of losing it over there. Putin is doing things for no reason, and it's embarrassing. It's like, what Putin's doing is embarrassing. He's embarrassing himself. It's like, it's cringe. Everybody's like cringing, and it's like, we just want this to be over, and so Putin can retire, and because he's just did this for nothing, right? This is kind of the subtext, and
I think of that song, Psycho Killer, Run Away.
It's just like,
and I think of Vladimir Putin. I had to make that his campaign song if he runs again.
I mean, it's like when we look at what's happening on the ground versus the impression that Trump is trying to give for whatever reason, personal mood, ambition, or strategy, who knows? We see something like this. Now, this is from the Wall Street Journal. The US reinforces Europe's northern front, fearing war with Russia. And they talk about Gotland, Sweden. US Marines, they train over there in Sweden with a mobile rocket system. They fire dummy ammunition, and they're doing all kinds of things, right? It's like a testing ground, and they're structuring.
So there's U.S. Marines on Gotland Island.
Yeah, and
wow,
this is
nice.
So there's so many things happening at the same time, but you don't really see many headlines about it, and you have to read these more obscure military magazines to get some more insight into what's going on, because if you just focus on the regular media, they give you like a silly interpretation of Trump said something or somebody else said something, but what's happening on the ground? And so here they're saying this: some European officials worry that America's commitment to the transatlantic alliance is waning given Trump's criticism of it and his stated desire to reduce military engagement abroad, but U.S. military commanders say their posture remains firm. Quote, from a U.S. Army perspective, my orders haven't changed, says Brigadier General Andrew Zaslav, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations for U.S. Army Europe and Africa. While the question of future U.S. engagement is on my mind, he said, I've been doing this too long to get hyper-focused on political wins and messaging that isn't orders. Yikes. So this is the difference between the blah blah and the public, the politics. But there's a lot happening that people are not yet ready supposed to see that
Alex,
much.
Tell me, with this request by NATO for Germany to send 7 brigades. Now, am I right? Does Germany only have fully deployed 8 brigades, with 1 already in the Baltic states? Sending 7 would send almost the entire German army to the Baltics. Is my memory on the German order of battle right?
The concept, for a long time, the concept has been a European Union army without calling it a European Union army. So basically that means that each individual country has a specific task, and not every country in Europe is supposed to do all the tasks. No, so the US, they have an army, they have an air force, they have the logistics, they have space war, they have everything. But in Europe,
America's the backup. America's the backup that can do everything, all the complicated stuff for everyone else.
America can do it all, but the Europeans are supposed to split these tasks among each other. So this is also one of the reasons.
They specialize, right?
Yeah, specialized, and also
the British and Canadians specialize in anti-submarine warfare. Yeah. The Germans specialize in
make things. Yeah, we make things.
Making equipment so to upgrade the armies with a really wonderful infantry armored fighting vehicle, wonderful tanks, things like that. And of course, you've got countries like France. I don't know what they specialize in, but France makes a lot of military stuff. I think they make.
Of course, and they can make. Yeah, and they can make more plutonium. They can make make a lot more warheads if that becomes necessary. Who knows what they're doing in secret? I mean, who would publish the numbers, really? I mean, why would the French say what they got? Why would the British say what they got?
France is the only continental NATO country that has its own nuclear forces.
Yeah, and they have so many nuclear power plants. They have so many experts and facilities to actually make more plutonium or highly enriched uranium, make any sort of modern bomb, and then produce it on scale. And we, the Germans, we also had a bunch of nuclear power plants. So we still have the experts, we still have some facilities, and we have cutting edge, researchers and people who specialize in these things. So you can just combine these things, and as a bonus for the European Union leadership, of course, as a bonus for them, each country cannot defend themselves. They cannot function by themselves. So we depend on the collective and the leadership, the European Union leadership, which is a highly dangerous concept, but there you go. So we don't have that much manpower at this point, but we can have Volkswagen make military goods because the cars are not that selling that well anymore because they've gotten extremely expensive. But Volkswagen can make military goods, Rheinmetall, Thyssen, all these companies, they can make so much stuff. And in terms of manpower, we have what? Europe has what? 500 plus million people. We can find enough young men to be equipped and trained. So that's entirely possible. I mean, what is it? European Union has more than 500 million people. Russia itself is like, what, 150 these days? 140 these? You're muted. Your mic is still muted.
They have 141, I think, but it's hard to tell. They were 145 million when the Soviet Union broke up, and I think the population has declined by a few million.
So it's like we can find enough people, we can make enough stuff, and also the military, the economic force is quite staggering when you combine all these membership countries.
The problem is, Alex, that NATO, that the European countries have let their military industries rot away, and so they have to sort of start from scratch, building everything, and that takes time, and training the people and creating the people who train the people. I mean, it's really, it's like kind of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's of course it's easier to come up with with software and develop something and not make it yet. You have
your energy problems.
You can develop specific elements, or you already have specific elements because you can make one specific part of a drone, and the other company can make another specific part of a drone, and the other. We can make explosives really well. I mean, Germany has one of the most significant chemical industries in the world, so we can make explosives on scale, right? I mean, we can make so many conventional explosives and some fancier new stuff. It's what I'm most concerned about, because I listen to these experts all the time, and they say in public in a very limited, censored fashion, right? And all the think tank guys, they're always so limited in what they are allowed to say. And they talk about, well, the Russians, they can do something, the Russians can pull something off, something new off within the next months, right? They can go into the Baltics, and it's really shocking. Don't get me wrong on this, of course. They can go into Finland or really, really shocking. But they can do that on short notice, they say. But something really, really large, that will take another maybe 7 years of preparation for the Russians, and if we match that, blah, blah, blah. Now, I have a problem with this view in public because it's so narrowly focused on conventional warfare. Warfare is much more complex. Now, there are, we can basically tell that there are deeply embedded Russian structures in the West. They are so contained within the intelligence apparatus of the Russians that almost no intelligence officer in Russia is supposed even to know about it. It's supposed to be hyper secret, to be activated in times of war or shortly before something larger. So we can expect massive interruptions. in the West, especially in Europe, also in the United States, massive sabotage, massive interruptions. There's also the next level of chemical weapons that the Russians have, especially the non-lethal stuff or less lethal stuff. There's the latest and greatest in biological warfare. It's possible to use this stuff with sneak attacks, right? So nobody claims responsibility for a sneak up biological attack. Then there's the whole nuclear war thing. And then there's a combination attacks. Now, this is when, during the pandemic, I mean, you saw very, very few experts ever talking about combination attacks. I mean, I found some material from the United States, a little bit from Europe. And this is when security experts say, okay, imagine there's no more power. There's a huge power outage. There's communication breaks down. You quickly realize you don't know what's going on. You will run out of food very quickly. Some people in your family need new medication. So you need to go out, but then there's a new virus going around because it's a combination attack. So you have to go out and look for the things you need, but that's when you catch the new virus thing, right? So it's a combination attack. I mean, of course you can load up a chemical warhead. You put that on a missile, not a nuclear warhead, a chemical one. You shoot this rocket over Berlin. The warhead detonates, and you get this cloud of some fancy new chemical, and pretty much everybody in Berlin or Kiev or whatever, everybody in that city will be unable to properly function for the next few weeks or maybe even months. Not just killing people with the most deadly chemical, but just, incapacitating. That's what they call it, incapacitating agents. So it's like nobody should have any illusions over, what warfare is. It's not just the tank. It's not just the soldier with a rifle in battle. It's the intelligence front. It's deep cover embedded assets that will only get activated under the most dire circumstances, because you can only use them once, basically. They can only do the prepared thing once. Disabling a power plant, disabling this, disabling that. And so it's a situation where the Russians have certain advantages and disadvantages, okay? So we need to try to look at the whole picture. And here, with the Nordics, they say this: the high north and the Baltics have been thrust into the center of U.S. war planning, as their access to shipping routes, territory, and energy reserves will be crucial to the West in a new era of geopolitical conflict. Now, that's the Wall Street Journal saying the high north of Europe and the Baltics have been thrust into the center of U.S. war planning. And the other guy said, don't listen too much what the politicians are saying. These are our orders on the ground. This is what we're told.
Yeah, well, just for geography, one of the biggest military complexes in Russia is in the Kola Peninsula, which is directly adjacent to the Nordic countries, to Finland and Norway. Murmansk is near the Norwegian-Russian border, near the Finnish-Russian border. And Murmansk is the home of the Northern Fleet, the biggest part of the Russian Navy, which is their access to the Atlantic. And of course, they've got their submarine bunkers, their SSBN force, where their submarine-launched ballistic missiles come from. And of course, they've got large air forces stationed in the Kola Peninsula. It's just riddled with military bases. So it's a very significant region. During the 1980s, the Russian plan, the Soviet plan, was to break across Finland into Sweden, even though those countries were neutral and were not part of NATO, and to conquer all the way to Norway, because the Russians believed that control of Norway, like the Germans believed in World War II, was a key thing to have the Norwegian ports to extend the basing of Russian submarines and the basing of Russian naval units and air units into the Atlantic, into the North Sea, and over Great Britain, of course. So the Scandinavian Peninsula was strategic in World War II. The Germans were able to almost strangle Britain, operating U-boats out of Norway and having access to all the sea lanes around Iceland. If you remember the battleship Bismarck, broke out from Norway and was intercepted off the coast of Greenland in a thick fog by the HMS Hood and the Prince of Wales, and blew the HMS Hood out of the water, just destroyed it with a salvo, escorted by a cruiser, I think the Prince Eugene. Right? Am I remembering that right? And then the Bismarck ended up getting sunk trying to make it to France. It was trying to get to Brest. When it's but it's always been important, Norway, for the reason of the naval and air basing out of it, and for Russia especially important because the Arctic against the United States is the invasion route. And again, the Nordic countries are transarctic countries. They allow the Americans close access to attack to the Kola Peninsula. And the Russians can't have it. I mean, it was a disaster for Putin after he invaded Ukraine to have Finland and Sweden immediately apply for entry into NATO. That's how threatened those countries were. And you can see this is a good view to see the Arctic. That's North America. You can see Canada, but if you scroll up, there's Norway and Sweden. They look upside down here, but you can see the Kola Peninsula sort of sticks out. It's like something from a hammerhead shark there, sticking out from Russia. You can see the Finnish border. It's a very long border, and again, Poland sending HIMARS to assist the Finnish military. And Finland has the highest per capita, men in service, men in uniform of any country in NATO. They've really mobilized their manpower. Because look at that big border they have with Russia. They have a huge border with Russia, and an absolutely huge border with Russia. And it's and of course you can see Sweden. I think Finland has a population of 5 to 6 million people. Sweden has a population of 10 point something million people. So those are the most populous Nordic countries. Norway and Denmark are much smaller. Iceland is very small. But those are the Nordic countries. And Sweden, of course, builds its own fighter jets, has a naval presence in the Baltic, and of course maintains radars and surface-to-air missile defenses, and has been rebuilding since the Euromaidan revolution. The Swedes have become alarmed at Russia's aggressiveness.
Yeah, and it's like when years ago people including myself, we warn about something big is coming down the pipe. It's like don't have illusions about it. Something big is going to happen eventually. And the Baltics. The Baltics at the time, they started to get worried, and they said, "Why? We are like on a silver platter. We're much too easy a target. Why isn't Europe doing more? Why aren't they standing their ground?"
Yeah. Well, I think
part of it is also if the worst thing, and this happened over and over again in simulations and war games inside NATO, trying to guess how far the Russians could go, what problems they would encounter, and it was always about the Russians getting stuck. And if you draw them in, and then they get stuck, where do they go?
Yeah, well, the problem with the Baltic states, and we just looked at the geography upside down, is that the Baltic states are pressed right up against Russia. They're 3 small countries. I don't think their population is much over 3 million. I haven't checked lately, but they're not big countries. They're small. You can see we're looking at them upside down, and you could see. Could you get the names to pop up again?
Yeah,
Probably
depends on Google here.
It's funny. They popped up, but anyway, you put the pointer on Lithuania. There it is, Lithuania. We call it Lithuania. And of course, there's Latvia right above it, in Estonia. Tallinn is the capital of Estonia. Yeah. Riga is the capital of Latvia. And of course, Vilnius is the capital of Lithuania. And these countries, and of course, you see the Kaliningrad salient. You could point that. That's a piece of Russian territory. Can you point to Kaliningrad?
Hang on, where is it? It's
in
so
between Poland and Lithuania.
Because it's upside down. This thing here, right?
Kaliningrad is where Königsberg. It used to be East Prussia. was German territory taken by the Russians at the
This
end of
thing
World War
here.
II. The Germans were driven out of this territory. It was a German populated. This is East Prussia. It was a German territory for centuries, and the Russians took this place. And of course, we're looking at it upside down on the map, but this is a military salient of the Russians, the furthest west piece of Russian territory. Now, look at how far away this place is from Russia. This is amazing. This chunk of Russia sitting in Europe, in almost in Central Europe, and you can look. You've got the Baltic states and Belarus are between Russia and Kaliningrad.
Yeah.
See that? And of course, you can see Minsk is the capital of Belarus, Belarus, as people say. But it's you can see this. This is the situation where things are heating up now. And just from a military standpoint, I want to point out some things that I learned from Lee Wheelbarger. The NATO countries only maintain an average of 4 jet fighters to protect the Baltic states. And the reason they do that is it's so far forward that Russian missile attacks and Russian surprise attack could destroy any large air deployment in the Baltic states. And you look at how far away the Baltic states are from NATO's main bases. It's really a bad idea with Russian missile capabilities to have your air units too far forward deployed because they could be wiped out on the ground. So you don't want to put significant air forces on the ground in those countries. And the problem is that if the Russian plan would be to occupy the Savaki Gap, the area between Poland and Lithuania, where the NATO connects, and in that area, the Savaki Gap is, you could point that border area. It's the Savaki, right? No, your pointer to you see the border between Poland and Lithuania. Maybe you could put the pointer right on that border.
This is Poland, this is Lithuania. Yeah.
Right, that's the Savaki Gap. And the danger is, this is what the Russian strategy would be, to occupy that border area there. See that? That border area between Poland and Lithuania would be occupied by the Russians. They wouldn't necessarily invade the whole Baltic states. They'd cut that. Now, why would they? They cut it for 2 reasons. They would be linking up with their forces in Kaliningrad, and they are reinforcing Kaliningrad every day. There's flights coming in. They've moved, according to Lee Wheelbarger, they've moved 2 elements of, or maybe the entirety of 2 motorized infantry brigades. They've got Marine brigades in there already. They've moved engineering troops in there because there's a lot of bridges and canals in Kaliningrad and in the urban area, which NATO could bomb the bridges and cut the place up. And so they've been preparing, and they've been building bunkers, and they are building new S-400 surface-to-air missile sites. It's just a porcupine quill of surface-to-air missiles there. And of course, if they occupy that Savaki Gap, they cut off the electrical lines running from the rest of Europe into the Baltic states. They cut off the transport lines, communication lines, the supply lines going into the Baltic states. So the only way the Baltic states can get support is by sea or air. But the problem is the Russian air forces are concentrated in Russian airfields on the Russian and Belarusian side of that border, massively concentrated, especially around St. Petersburg. You can kind of point to where that is. Yeah, right there in the Gulf of Finland. Yep, there's St. Petersburg. There's just north of St. Petersburg, there's a very large Russian airfield filled with fighters there, just stacked up. And of course, there's larger airfields on the other side of Lake Ladoga, up there with anti-shipping bombers. They can reach the Baltic ports. They could sink NATO ships trying to bring in supplies. So they could put an air and naval blockade, and their air blockade would not only be the Russian Air Force doing it, but Russia has built almost in a semicircle this massive array of S-400 anti-aircraft sites. And those things have a 400-kilometer range. And to give people an idea of 400 kilometers is these bases can practically cover Poland, all the Baltic states, and pretty far out into the Baltic Sea, preventing NATO air traffic. And so you have, I think you've got several brigades already defending Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. Their native forces, I think there's like 4 or 5.
So maybe I should
brigades.
show, just for scale comparison, right?
Yeah.
So people can get an
Maybe,
idea of what.
maybe.
So
Yeah.
this thing here is
Can you turn it upright
Europe.
so people can see it in the upright position?
How does that work?
Flip the world over the other way.
Yeah, let me just flip the world here.
Pole to pole.
Maybe just go from that side.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, that looks more like we're used to.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay,
just
there
for
you go.
scale, this is Europe or Western Europe. This is
That's Germany. Yeah.
Germany is about, I think, 1/3 the size of Texas. Okay. Now on that side we have huge Russia, China, massive,
Enormous. 11 time zones Russia is.
yeah, massive behemoth, and let me just. This
And
is
China's
Europe.
very big too.
Yeah, this is Europe,
Yes.
and then of course we have the United States
United
of America,
States,
which is
yeah.
also very, very massive. But yeah, I mean, the world seems a small place on this map, this digital map, and with today's technology, the world has become smaller, or it seems so, right? If intercontinental ballistic missiles can reach target in minutes,
and you're on France here. Let's talk about France, because France is the 4th largest nuclear power behind China and the United States and Russia. France has, last count, I think it was Sarkozy said that France had 290 nuclear warheads. And that was when was Sarkozy president? 30 years ago?
Been a while.
That's a while, or 20-something years ago. Anyway, that's the last count we have, and they keep it pretty secret. But France has, I think, about 10 nuclear ballistic missile submarines. Each one can fire 16 submarine-launched ballistic missiles. That's intermediate-range ballistic missiles with nuclear weapons. They scrapped their land-based missile force at the end of the Cold War, sometime in the 90s, I don't remember. But they also have aircraft delivery for nuclear weapons, and I don't know, 10 nuclear submarines with 16 apiece gives you 160 of that 290 count. The rest of them can be delivered by bombers or other aircraft. And so that is the French, and they have some kind of, I think they have a missile that they fire off their bombers or their air units. And I think their aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, can fire nuclear weapons. I'm not sure if they're carrying them now, but that's a considerable nuclear capability.
Yeah, and also
France.
they've had so much nuclear energy. I mean, all these nuclear power plants,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and it's like when you have, just like Germany, when you have nuclear power plants on that scale, you are a few steps away from making warheads or making more warheads than you already have.
You just need a breeder reactor.
Because
there you have it.
you can have you have the capability to make plutonium or to make warheads. You have the facilities, you have the experts, you have the equipment
You can enrich
needed.
uranium or plutonium. Yes.
Exactly, and you can make this bomb design, you can make that bomb design, and it's like the possibilities are quite high. I mean, I remember when this Bavarian politician here, Franz Josef Strauss, he wanted to become chancellor, and he was one of the most pro-American guys in pro-American guys in German politics, and he was very adamant about having German nuclear weapons, under American supervision, of course, under NATO, but just have Germany or Western Germany in the Cold War be a nuclear power.
MLF, the multilateral force MLF, will scare Brezhnev. I hope that
we didn't get that.
As scared as I. That was Tom Lehrer.
So he was never allowed to implement that, but he got the second best thing, which is a thriving nuclear power industry. And of course, the greenies, the eco guys, they spend so much time. They spend so much time, talking. Just trash talking nuclear energy per se, and I understand that there's issues that need to be solved, but I mean, it was of course about the nuclear warfare potential. That's why Moscow was feeding these anti-nuclear power groups. And so, when you have the facilities, when you have the opportunities, you can get very close, very few steps almost up to the point where you can rapidly make nuclear weapons, and even some of the new stuff, right? Because when you have advanced facilities, you can test out new things, not a full reaction, but partial reactions, and you can try out different stuff. How about we mix this in? How about we change that around, mix that in? Can we make a better nuclear warhead? Can we make something that has benefits, for various reasons? Can we make them cheaper? Can we make this, that, and the other? So all that expertise can be pooled. Yeah. And I for the life of me, I cannot see the French being really transparent about any of this.
No.
Right? Because everything in France is tightly integrated. There's very little separation at the top between government and companies.
Here in America, we forget that France was and has been a great power.
Yeah.
Through most of its history. Before the unification of Germany, it was the greatest power on the continent of Europe for centuries, and a primary adversary of the British. The British and French have an old hatred that goes back to the 100 Years' War and so on. But France is a great power. I mean, I think America has 16, unless I know we're decommissioning. Was it 14 or 16 SSBNs? France has 10. Nuclear ballistic missile submarines. SSBN is what they're called, and it's quite a thing, quite an achievement. It's a technical achievement.
Yeah,
I think the British only have 2, right? Am I remembering that right?
I think that maybe some people remember this crucial moment. I think it was a crucial moment in the Ukraine war. This was, I think, the first time we got footage. I don't know exactly when it was. We got footage of a Ukrainian drone of some sort, a Ukrainian drone delivering a small amount of conventional explosives right into Moscow or St. Petersburg or whatever it was, some kind of very famous spot. And now, of course, we see the new drones from Ukraine getting deeper and deeper into Russian territory. Hitting different targets, ammo dumps and fuel refineries and storage facilities, this, that, and the other. Now, if you can get drones, relatively cheap drones, if you can get them so deep into Russia, you can put anything on that drone. In theory, you can put a small nuclear warhead onto a drone. You can put a chemical warhead onto a drone. You can put a biological warhead or some sort of biological warhead onto a drone and get into enemy territory. And I think this is what deterred the Russians so far from using biological warfare and using chemical warfare. Because the Ukrainians can get into Russia. They have. And it's like, submarines, nuclear submarines are still extremely important. Missiles are still incredibly important, but there's a new sheriff in town when it comes to the delivery systems, right? If you can make a drone that's even faster, if you can make multiple drones where you don't know which one is the relevant one, if you're trying to defend, you don't know if that's the relevant one or the other one is the relevant one. Or you make a drone that flies at very low altitude, right? I mean, or you make something that flies at a high altitude. It's gotten to a point where I think even seasoned military planners are overwhelmed by the sheer possibilities and the ensuing results of simulations, because you always want to be prepared, right? So the Russians do this, we have a simulation for that. The Russians then try the other thing, we have a simulation for that. But how many simulations can you have, and how many simulations can you remember as a military planner? Right? This is what may be a deterrent to everybody, ultimately. Because it just becomes, for the Russians, it can become very unpredictable very, very quickly. And it's not like if you just bring in enough Chinese soldiers to Europe, which is easy to do, or you bring enough North Korean soldiers into Europe, which is easy to do, you can try to overwhelm Europe with conventional warfare, but there's all these other options on the table, things that the Russians have themselves. When you think about fancy new chemicals that will incapacitate an enemy soldier for a couple of weeks, not necessarily leaving any lasting damage, but just incapacitating that person for weeks. So there's so many things to remember, and it's so important for people to stay involved and look through these deceptions, because this is something that the average person can do. You can't. Not everybody can be involved in the nuts and bolts of warfare on the ground, right? But there's so many things you can do, because the Russians depend on their sleeper agents, right? The Russians depend on these things that we learn about in the Cold War, when even seasoned KGB guys who defected said, yeah, there's some stuff, we kind of guess what it is inside the KGB, but almost nobody's allowed to see it. It's separated from the rest of the KGB, and it's got something to do with sabotaging the enemy in times of war.
Can you show the map again of the world?
Sure. Hang on a sec.
I just thought, since I mentioned, I just checked. No, I was wrong. The British have 4 Trident submarines, each able to carry 48 warheads, is what they carry, and they maintain 1 on patrol at all times. I guess the other 3 are in port, and that's Great Britain. It's an island country. It's a famous naval power. Britain ruled the seas for centuries, especially from the what in Europe is known as the 7 Years' War. In America, we call it the French and Indian War, which lasted about 7 years.
It was a world war type situation.
It was a world war. It was really the first world war, the 7 Years' War. It went from 1756 to 1763, and it was the war in which Great Britain conquered India, took India from the French, took Canada from the French, took Cuba and the Philippines, but gave them back to Spain. But it was a decisive war, and the British Empire then ruled the seas with a tremendous navy, just unbeatable. The French tried many times to challenge the British Navy. The only French naval victory I can really remember was during the American Revolution, which allowed Washington to trap Cornwallis's army and make it surrender, ending the American Revolution. And of course, that was an important thing. But going back to Britain, World War II, the British were again huge. They had a huge navy in World War II. The Germans just couldn't stand up to it. The Italian Navy couldn't stand up to it. The British basically, even before the Americans entered the war, were able to hold the seas against the Axis quite handily, despite the losses like in fighting the Bismarck or stopping the pocket battleships or fighting the Italian Navy in the Med. They really they did a tremendous work, and the British Navy had to protect the convoys that fed the British people. But Britain was exhausted by World War II, and the size of its navy, it's not the great naval power it was. It's I think they have about 220 to 30 nuclear warheads. They have fewer warheads by last count than the French, and they keep fewer of their warheads available. I think there's only the 40 to 48 in the one deployed Trident at a time. I thought there was only 2, but there's 4. They only keep 1 at sea. Yeah. That was my understanding. And they used to have bombers, strategic bombers, but they retired them. So they can't deliver nuclear strikes by bombers, but only by their submarine. So Britain is really not as strong as France, but it has almost as many nuclear warheads as France. If they were able to put to sea with all their Tridents, that would be scary for Russia. If the British and French were alerted and had all their SSBNs to sea, I mean that would be that'd be close to 500 nuclear weapons they could hit Russia with. Yeah, I mean that's kind of scary.
Ultimately the British Empire. The British they had the same problem as virtually any significant empire in the past, especially Rome. Everybody knew where Rome ended and where Rome started, and what was Roman and what was not Roman, right? So this is like, if you appear like this, on the world stage. Here we are. This is us. It makes the enemy start to look and probe where the weaknesses are, where the internal weaknesses are, border weaknesses are, and they know exactly what Rome is and what isn't Rome. But eventually, especially with the French and the British and this whole weirdo European Union thing, I think this is when they learned to not be open, to make it seem more complex than it really is. I mean, why would you still appear on the surface as a British Empire? Why would you not spread things around, even globally, with the Commonwealth and structures you may still have in India?
But the British
and
don't really control any of the Commonwealth countries anymore.
No, but it's like when
Australia, New Zealand, Canada,
no, but it's like common shared. So if you have common shared interests, when some of these former British colonies, they do not want to fall under Russian control or Chinese control, right?
Or French control.
Or French control, yeah. When you still have certain structures in place, it doesn't have to be called Britain. It doesn't have to be all Brit and all white and just look the traditional way. But you still have this economic power. You still have this whole offshore. The whole offshore corporate thing and the offshore banking thing and all these structures that.
Well, what is Britain's exports? Financial services and pharmaceuticals. What do they have in Britain?
Yeah, but it's like if you have this offshore banking thing and you have like these growing hedge funds, a super hedge fund, they can start buying things in different countries and influence them in a subtle way. I mean, you buy 10% of this, you buy 10% of that, and another British large-scale bank or British-centered sort of hedge fund, they can buy another 10% of this and another 10% of that, right. And this is how you maintain some sort of meaningful presence. Look, it says here, for example, this Gotland is among the most strategic locations in Northern Europe, allowing the deployment of sensors and long-range weapon systems.
Well, let's just show people where it is on the map. Gotland is an island in the middle of the Baltic Sea that's Swedish territory, and it is strategic. It's an unsinkable aircraft carrier for basing planes to dominate that body of water. Anybody who controls that island, and that island has airfields on it. And the Swedes, they don't maintain aircraft on it, but they maintain aircraft in Sweden that can fly there, rebase, and strike from there.
Where's this thing again?
Well, it's right. You can see it's the big island right in the middle.
This one.
To the right. There you go. That's it. That's Gotland right there. Yeah. And it's, by the way, the main population centers on the west side of the island, where the Swedes normally maintain a battalion. I think it's like a mechanized infantry or an infantry type battalion. And that's where you said the Marines were training now with the Swedes, was Gotland, yes. Right? And you can see how strategically located it is. And the Swedes have airfields there. They don't forward base planes there so they don't get struck, but they can quickly move planes and helicopters in there and then attack out of it to support the Baltic states. And Sweden is very keen on keeping the Baltic states independent. And you can see why. Look at the coast. Russia has very little coastline in the Baltic. They have the Russian coast up in the Gulf of Finland by St. Petersburg, and they've got the coast down in Kaliningrad, where they have surface naval squadrons, mostly corvettes. They've got, I think, only one destroyer and a frigate, and the rest are corvettes organized into missile boat brigades, I think is what they call them. And that's their forces, the Russian surface fleets in the Baltic. They're amphibious. By the way, the Russians used to have an amphibious force in the Baltic, but they moved it to the Black Sea for the Ukraine war, and it got shot up pretty badly. I think some of its ships were sunk by the Ukrainians.
They're saying after being demilitarized for years, Gotland is at the heart of Swedish rearmament. In war, the island can serve as a hub for NATO logistics and control of sea line communications, and to help build up offensive capabilities for deep strikes on enemy soil.
Yeah, and the Russians really want... Now, let me tell you, let's go back to the map. I want to show what Lee Wheelbarger talked about the buildup in Kaliningrad. The Russian helicopter forces which are they're flying tanks that can carry infantry, are being built up, and they're within range. Those helicopters can reach Gotland from Kaliningrad, and I'm not sure if they can reach there. They can just I'm not sure if they can reach there from the Gulf of Finland, but they can reach there, and they could do an invasion of Gotland. And but the problem with invading Gotland by an air mobile attack, because they don't have amphibious forces anymore, is that the Russian helicopters can be shot down not only by Swedish fighters but Swedish anti-aircraft missiles. So it's very hard for Russia to get in there. That could be a catastrophe if they tried. They'd have to use missile strikes and bomber strikes to take out the Swedish anti-air defenses, and the Russians have been incapable of taking out Ukrainian anti-air defenses in the Ukraine war. So it's doubtful they have that capability. So Gotland is a very important. You're looking at, of course, there's a big airfield there. Mm-hmm. And of course, these airfields in Kaliningrad are being used to move these giant Antonov aircraft that they can actually move an SS-27 ICBM into the country, into that territory. And I just saw yesterday on Lee's satellite imagery 2 SS-27s sitting in a base in Kaliningrad in the open with storage units that could put dozens of SS-27s in them and hide them. I was dumbfounded. I didn't realize they had SS-27 sitting in Kaliningrad, but they do. That was another revelation. But yeah, Kaliningrad is a base for launching forward attacks, but it's also very vulnerable, as a forward position would be. The Russians, who strikes first in war can be very decisive on these things. But yeah, and you can see where that is relative to Gotland. And I don't know if it's I don't know what that is. Is that 250 kilometers, would you say?
Well, it's this line for measurement down here, right? This little thing down there, that's 200 kilometers. 200 kilometers. So it's like from here to there. It's maybe that's maybe 200. That's maybe 200. Yeah. That's maybe 300, or that's maybe 300. It's not it's not that far. I mean, look for Germany. I mean, if I'm here around Nuremberg, I can get to Berlin in if we drive really fast, it's like 4 hours or maybe quicker, and you can go across Germany in just very few hours. If you drive as fast as we usually do. And this is just car speeds. This is not rocket speeds. This is not airplane, speeds. This is how it's. Well, I wouldn't say tiny, but it's.
The operational range of a fully loaded Russian combat helicopter, that's the Mi-35, Ka-52, and Mi-28s, is 450 kilometers. So they can easily reach Gotland from Kaliningrad. I'm not sure if they could reach the St. Petersburg area, but those helicopters, by the way, can carry 2 additional external fuel tanks that could extend the range. That's without extending the range. They could go 450 kilometers. So
we're not. And we're not getting. In public, we're not getting that much information. So there's always more going on. I mean, they give us a little bit here. They say to simulate the defense of Gotland, a UK Pathfinder platoon last week carried out reconnaissance. Days later, 110 UK paratroopers dropped 1,000 feet from 2 A400M transport aircraft onto an open field before trekking through the night through woods to secure an aircraft landing zone. Meanwhile, around midnight, a unit of US Marines arrived nearby with a mobile rocket system which can be deployed quickly in the event of war. Hours earlier, the Marines had been in Norway. After launching the dummy munitions, poles made of concrete, the Marines flew the system to Finland for a similar demonstration. And they talk about the HIMARS system and similar systems like GMLRS or ATACMS. They say and they say the pace. one of the main tasks facing NATO members is to ensure that their respective military systems function smoothly together. The American-led rocket launch on Gotland relied on complex multinational communication involving sensors, command and control in airfields in several countries. In Lithuania, NATO forces simulated evacuations and treatment of casualties through 3 types of medical and evacuation systems, each of which belong to different nations. So it's like, just integrating systems. And here is, just for comparison, here is an actual current piece from the publication The Insider. And it's the headline is Russian servicemen on the army's degradation. And they talk about kind of the other side, where they are struggling to maintain basic function. You know, when the Russians have started to ship in the poor people, you know, they mobilized the poor people. They've mobilized a bunch of alcoholics, and they mobilized North Koreans, and even if you're just dealing with Russians, the communication is really bad. Structure is really bad. Organization is really bad. And some of the some people that got captured or defected, they tell us, give us additional information about that. The current state of the Russian military. It says here, the problems in the Russian army start at the top, at the junction between senior and mid-level leadership. For the top brass, the only thing that matters is achieving objectives, pushing forward on a sector or holding ground somewhere. How mid-level managers, meaning the lower-ranking commanders, accomplish that is their problem, says Igor, former staff officer. One public example, the assault by Russian Marines who advanced under red flags straight through a minefield, a move that shocked even the pro-war community. Another, troops assembled for a motivational speech by former Lieutenant General Akhmedov, at which point Ukrainian forces struck them with a HIMARS missile. And so there's this one guy, this Igor guy that they're quoting and others, and he says, when I was there was zero coordination. My direct commander just didn't show up. He lied that he had other tasks and vanished. We came under artillery fire, and I got hit with shrapnel. One piece struck my side, another hit my arm. I crawled into cover and started gnawing the shard out of my arm. Another interviewee, Sviatoslav, a convict who signed a military contract, also describes how commanders disappear or refuse to take part in combat operations, leaving their troops stranded at the front. Sviatoslav was sentenced to 10 years in prison for possession and distribution of drugs. A few months after his sentencing, he was sent to fight in the Donetsk region. And he says, there were 100 of us during the combat prep stage. Only 2 survived. The mission was a death trap. Everything was mined. There were no friendly forces there. Though we were told they were in place and waiting for us. We just arrived, dug in, and were hit by drones. No one came to help. We tried calling for support over the radio, but they ignored us. I was literally stepping over the corpses of the same guys I trained with when we were moving in, and stepping over them again when I ran back.
Well, you know, one thing is the Russian army does not have a strong NCO. They have very few NCOs, if any, and so they don't see in the Western army.
Can you explain to me what exactly is a non-commissioned officer?
A sergeant, a corporal, a staff sergeant, a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, a sergeant major. What it is that each of these ranks of sergeants correspond to a rank of officer. So a platoon sergeant is matched with a lieutenant, you know, a second lieutenant, maybe a first lieutenant. And then the next highest rank of sergeant is matched with a captain. And then the next highest rank of sergeant is matched with a major, matched with a colonel. And I think sergeant major, the highest rank, is matched with a general. So you have NCOs that are enlisted men who work directly with the officers and do a lot of the heavy lifting and the work, and because they're not officers, they have a closer relationship with the men. They're more integrated with the men, and then they're integrated with the officers. So they're this in-between thing that's very important in training, in operations. A lot of times, what officers are in the military is they are communicating, translating the orders of their superiors to the NCOs, who then translate it to the soldiers, and the NCOs will tell the officers, the men don't think they can do this, or the men, in other words, there's a kind of a feedback, right?
Yeah.
And the NCOs, they're extremely important because unlike, I see officers have all this schooling, and they're not, the officers' corps, they're college boys, whereas the NCOs, they come up the hard way. Most NCOs, they start out as privates, and they climb the ranks. So they know all the levels. So the NCOs are guys that come up from the bottom who know more. They have more organic integral knowledge. And so the officers who just, you go to officer candidate school, and you go directly to being a second lieutenant. You get out of officer candidate school and you graduate, you're a second lieutenant. And, but you don't, here you are, a newly minted second lieutenant. Well, what do you know? What is your combat experience? You need a sergeant, you need a platoon sergeant who, like when I was in officer candidate school, all the staff sergeants, the platoon sergeants, the gunnery sergeants, they'd fought in Vietnam. This was the 1970s. They had combat experience. Even the officers below captain didn't. Because they were what? They were relatively newly minted second lieutenants and first lieutenants who didn't serve in Vietnam. So here you always have this reserve of more experienced NCOs that really help the officer. In the German army in World War II had the same system of non-commissioned officers. It makes everything, and the Russians don't have this. They don't have it. And it really handicaps them.
Here's another example. Where is it? Junior Lieutenant Yevgeny says the negligent treatment of personnel is the result not only of poor tactical decisions, but also of a lack of qualified officers. It's all parade ground types and desk jockeys. There are some combat experienced ones, but those are either butchers like Xenofontov or decent people, and the decent ones usually get wiped out because no one needs someone who asks too many questions. Battalion commanders, for example, always stay in the rear. You can't drag them to the front. And if a company commander is decent and tries to protect his people, he's not allowed to think for himself. Officers don't have much choice. Either follow the idiotic orders from above, meaning those of the battalion commanders and higher, who don't know a damn thing, or end up in Zaitsevo, he says. Sergei, who miraculously survived the assault near Klishivka in 2023, previously fought in the Second Chechen War, recalls that during his time in Ukraine, he could count the number of officers with professional military training on one hand, and even those weren't particularly sharp. Our battalion commander was the only career officer. The rest were from other security agencies with no real military background. But even that commander was a complete idiot. First off, he was a tank officer, not infantry. Second, he was drunk all the time. I never saw him sober. So yeah, he was a career officer, permanently drunk and utterly useless. Our battalion commander was the only career officer. The rest had nothing to do with military specialties. So wow. I mean, we knew that from the last couple of decades, the massive problems, within the conventional Russian forces, and we saw all kinds of wargaming, even when things were kept calm in the public eye, before 2014. Before the takeover of Crimea, there was a lot of talk in public. That's not worry. It's all gonna be fine. Blah blah blah. But under the surface, it was already bubbling everywhere. And I remember that one specific. This was like a briefing document from NATO. They were observing a larger Russian exercise, and this exercise was freaking out Poland because the Polish they understood that this was an exercise meant to prepare for an assault against Poland. The Russians would, of course, deny this, but so the Russians did this exercise. NATO was trying to observe it as good as they could, and then NATO drew up a report of how the Russians performed in that exercise. And the result was, yeah, the Russians had massive problems. They still haven't fixed this. Russians still haven't fixed that. And ultimately, because the conventional forces got stuck, the Russians in this exercise then resorted to nuclear weapons. And this is kind of like this is why it has to be a multi dimensional planning, and also our understanding of it has to be multi faceted, because if the Russians get stuck like this, they can ship in more Koreans, they can ship in Chinese soldiers if they want to. Maybe they will get stuck, and what are they going to do next? And we heard about this thing from the Nordics, when they exercise in Gotland, how important it is for NATO to integrate all these different people who all speak different languages, because that's our big problem here in Europe. Everybody speaks a different language. And all these systems have to be integrated, and it really takes various experts in various places to do this one thing correctly, right? And if we have this disruption going on by sleeper networks, Russian sleeper networks that have never been activated before, if we get all this interruption, how much of our stuff is still going to work? So we have to think about that. I mean, it's one thing if the Russians get drunk all the time and they're stupid and dysfunctional, but how dysfunctional are we going to be when our fancy stuff doesn't work?
Murphy's Law and everything, all militaries suffer from dysfunction. And, you've got the stories from the Vietnam War from the regular army, especially, not the Marines as much, or the paratroopers, but, for our elite troops in America always do very well. But back in those days with these we had a conscript army during Vietnam, and there was lots of stories about officers abandoning their men, but they had NCOs and men shooting their officers when they would give them crazy orders. And so you were always going to get this, even though the United States Army did very well in Vietnam. We destroyed a lot of communists in that war, but it's always these things happen. And in World War II, I mean, the U.S. Army in World War II fighting your country, fighting Germany, when you read the stories, and of course my knowledge is imperfect, but I love military history, but a lot of American lieutenants and captains, really an inordinate number, were killed in France and the Low Countries going into Germany. Lost a lot of officers because of American training went back to the Civil War. Always look for the flank. Well, in a continuous line on the Germany's Western Front, where the Allies were advancing, where's the flank?
Yeah.
It's a continuous line, from the English Channel down to Switzerland.
It's not home territory. It's not like it's home territory. It's territory. You have maps, but they're not precise. And what is the ground like? Is it raining? Is it mud?
That's how the American officers would be killed. They would be out front looking for the way to attack, trying to figure it out. And of course, they would be subject to German sniper fire, and they would get often picked off, wounded or killed. So we had a very, there was dysfunction, and the American Army was victorious. We won the Battle of Normandy. We took over before that. We won although we got hurt, a Second U.S. Army Corps got devastated at Kasserine, passed by Rommel. We won in Tunisia. We won in Sicily. We got to Rome on the same day as the Normandy invasion in June of 1944, and we took Paris. We went across the Rhine. We did the whole thing. But again, we were the victorious army, but we had a lot of dysfunction. And you remember you guys call it the Battle of the Ardennes. We call it the Battle of the Bulge, where 3 German armies, 2 Panzer armies, struck the U.S. Army group under Bradley and literally gutted it, split it in half, destroyed the middle of it, enveloped American units, destroyed them, went and broke through. It was scary. Eisenhower was extremely scared. The British called up more men, were mobilizing men desperately, fearing their army would be trapped in Holland. Of course, your country had mined all the ports in Holland. So if Montgomery's army got cut off, he would have been trapped and destroyed in there, because they couldn't have done a Dunkirk with all those mines there. The Germans had just laid sea mines all along these ports in Antwerp and whatnot. So it was almost a catastrophe, and it was it was the biggest, most bloody battle in American history, the Battle of the Bulge, the Battle of the Ardennes. And the German army inflicted that late in the war. It was December 16, 1944, and the battle went on into 1945. Very, very bloody. And of course, the performance of the American army in that battle. Later in the battle, we did very good when our Air Force could come in. But while we had no Air Force, while this heavy overcast lay over the battlefield, your country was kicking us around.
Yeah,
So
and there's so many.
Every army has problems, right?
And there's so many psychological aspects of war too. I mean, it's like an amateur who's not yet read into warfare. An amateur would think, well, war is about, the high-ranking officers planning, having a big map, and shoving little pieces around on the board, and then there's the soldier in the field, and the more heart the soldier has, the more manliness the soldier has, then the more manly soldiers who are more motivated win. There's so many other factors that go into this, and when it comes to when it comes to these things, when let's say the Russian soldiers, when the Russian soldiers, they have no trust in their officers, or when they have no trust really in their own system, people that came out of prison and it's, and then when you don't have backup, and when you don't have proper equipment, and when there's corruption everywhere, and your commanders don't show up, I mean, this is when the Germans they try to come up with new ways of keeping the motivation up, keeping the morale up. And one way was, of course, amphetamines. They would give significant doses of amphetamines to all kinds of soldiers, not just the pilots and not just the tank crew or the U-boat crews.
Because, and you might explain why, because in combat conditions, they might have to stay up for several days without sleep.
Yeah, and you have to be, and you're supposed to, I mean, the soldier was supposed to feel invincible. He was supposed to feel this rush, this surge of energy, and he was supposed to be faster than the enemy, because it was all about timing, and when the infamous or famous Rommel, when he was pushing into France at some point in his career, it was like this competition among officers, who would get there first, who would be faster. And
Rommel was in Guderian's panzer group, and he was the commander of 7th Panzer Division, and they were the first to reach the English Channel.
Yeah, and it was like at some point, Rommel was at some point he was becoming a bit irrational. He was too fast, and he lost contact with the people behind him. And he was getting into trouble in France because he was too fast. And it's like when people saw Rommel being in the middle of it, at the top of the whole operation, or when he was getting into his little airplane and just flying over the next potential battlefield, and then making up notes.
In Africa, he did that. Yeah.
Yeah, he did that a lot, and it's like then of course the propaganda would hype up his persona and his abilities, but
he was Hitler's favorite general for quite a while.
Yeah, and they found these ways. They found these ways to keep the morale up. Whether it be pills, amphetamines, the propaganda, or even some officers who would do things that other officers wouldn't necessarily do. Like, you had the old guard, you had the aristocrats that used to be more like in the background, and then you had some of the new guys like Rommel who felt disconnected to the aristocracy, so he wanted to stand out more and challenge the old guard. But when it comes to troop morale, I mean, the Russians have had this huge problem when it comes to equipment and these individual first aid kits. When they say our IFAKs, these individual first aid kits, they contain almost nothing, a little Band-Aid, a little this and that. The food was terrible, the food was outdated, the GPS was outdated, or even using Western GPS for that matter. It's like everything is bad. They know the Russian elite is living in palaces, but the soldier doesn't really get anything that's adequate. And NATO, of course, has made it a big point to motivate the Ukrainians by giving them a lot of cool stuff. I mean, if you see Ukrainians, they have the latest and greatest in combat gear, the specialized clothing, the really nice backpacks, and if the food. I mean, I saw videos when the troops would show what food they were getting, and it was really, really good. And it makes, I mean, if people know anything about warfare, it makes a world of difference.
If you have good rations, sure.
You have good rations. You get decent coffee. You get decent coffee or instant coffee, or you.
And that's one thing the Russian soldier doesn't have. We were showing how bad, your story about the Russian officers in the Ukraine war, how they abandon the men and leave them to die, and don't coordinate with each other and don't really seem to care, and who knows how much drinking is going on. But the German officer in World War II, this officer corps, these guys stuck by the men, and they were at the front lines. And you had a lot of people, Rommel, who had been a lieutenant and a captain in World War I, who had a lot of combat experience the German army had. And these guys were into physical fitness. They were up front telling you Rommel was a division commander, who's a general, commands a division. And when his division got into trouble, guess what? He was Johnny on the spot. And this is very typical of German division commanders, even corps commanders, where they would, Rommel, he had the British launched a counterattack against him with their very heavy tanks. And at the time, the German tanks weren't strong enough to fight those British tanks. He turned the German anti-aircraft guns, the 88s, at the British tanks, very famously, and he personally walked into this 88 unit to show them, and he was targeting he was going from gun to gun, showing them how to target, and there were French snipers nearby who were picking off the gun crews that were in range, and the guys were dropping around Rommel, and Rommel was calmly sighting these things, destroying British tanks. And this was in the memoir. I read the memoir of the head of his recon unit. Rommel's recon unit witnessed this himself and wrote about it, and he had tremendous admiration. This is where Rommel, a lot of these German commanders, and Rommel wasn't the only commander. There was a tremendous book on the 48th Panzer Corps in the Eastern Front by the commanders. I think it was von Mellenthin. Forget the other guy's name. They wrote this
rings a bell.
I think the book's called Panzer Corps. That was the 48th Panzer Corps. A Panzer Corps is basically 3 divisions, usually 2 Panzer divisions, or 1 Panzer division and 2 Panzer Grenadier divisions, and that formation fought the Russians, clear across Russia. And it's a tremendous story that they tell. And those 2 guys later were helping to train American generals in NATO. I think in 1980, those 2 guys showed up for a war game at NATO headquarters. There's an article online. I think you can still look up what they do, how they showed the Americans what they did against the Soviets in World War II. And they played a war game, and they outplayed the American commander. And the American commanders thanked them and said, we really learned. I mean, the Americans really learned a lot from those old German generals that fought on the Eastern Front, because the Americans were going to have to fight against the Soviets if they came across the Fulda Gap in the 1970s or 80s.
Yeah, and nowadays they call these North Koreans in Ukraine. I mean, so far they talk about 13,000, 15,000 actual communist North Koreans in Ukraine. They call them now the time travelers, because they still fight like decades ago.
Like the Korean War.
Yeah, like the human waves, and it's like it seems so weird and outdated. I mean, they can, of course, if they scale it up, it becomes a significant issue.
And these human waves, I knew an American colonel, Colonel Jensen. He was the regimental colonel for the 7th U.S. Army Regiment, and he wrote a great book. If you want to read a fantastic war story, his book is called Bloody Snow or Blood in the Snow. And he wrote it. It was his memoir of the Korean War. And I have it here. And I was a friend of his. I was privileged to be his friend. And he was a regimental service surgeon. And they were surrounded when the Chinese attacked, crossed the Yellow River and surprise attacked the UN forces under General Douglas MacArthur in, I think it was November or December 1950. I forget the dates. But they got surrounded, and they had to retreat through a sea of Chinese forming a regimental hedgehog, moving back day by day, digging foxholes where they had to stay and getting supplied by helicopters and having their wounded evacuated. And this was the early use of helicopters. And a tremendous story, but the Chinese troops, which is what the North Koreans were trained similarly, were human waves. They would hear the whistles or the bugles of the Chinese, and they were just huge human wave of Chinese soldiers with bolt-action rifles supported by mortars. And the Chinese mortars, they didn't have a mortar stand. They used a man's back as the mortar stand. They put the mortar on a guy's back, and you know how the mortar would be heated up. I don't know whether they had padding so the guy didn't get burned, but they would be bombarded by mortars, and which would shred anybody that wasn't dug in. And then they would charge the machine guns. And he said one time, and he would have to operate on wounded guys standing up in a shack where the shrapnel could hit him. And his hand, he'd have to pray so his hands would not shake, so he could operate on these wounded American soldiers. But one time he thought they were doomed. The Chinese just were overwhelming their defenses. And for some reason, and I don't know why, they were about to overrun them. And they got the bugle call or the whistles to retreat. And he said, oh my gosh, whoever would, the Chinese commander made a mistake. They had them. But a tremendous story, and that's how they fought in the Korean War, and why the Chinese lost 1 million men. I mean, the United States lost 50-something thousand dead in the Korean War. The Chinese lost 1 million dead, they some think, in the Korean War, and the North Koreans lost tremendous numbers too. But yeah, this manner of fighting, going back to the Korean War and World War II, the Soviets used these human wave tactics as described in Panzer Corps and described by other memoirs of Germans. Massive artillery bombardments followed by
it's like,
just huge attacks.
It's like, I mean, I think this is when I think this is why the comments, the recent comments by Donald Trump, I think why these comments by Trump are more effective psychologically than I think most people will realize on the surface, because it's like there's so much, the communist countries say they have so much riding on this right now. You know, the Ukraine war, what they've planned, you know, in the South China Sea and all the big stuff they have planned for so long. They got so much riding on this, and Trump is just saying, well, I don't, this, they're doing something that's not even important, right? It's not meaningful. It's stupid because it's real. It's cringe. It's silly. It's like, and now there's another psychological element to this, which is about tightening the loopholes that have been used so far by Russia and also by China and Iran to buy the components that they need, because most of the components in Russia's equipment, most of the components are still Western technology or Taiwanese technology. So they have to buy all these bits and pieces, and they couldn't buy it anymore officially. So they had to find ways around it, and this was a calculated move by these NATO countries. They knew the Russians were going to use loopholes and workarounds, and start relabeling tankers and ship things around and redeclare the goods. But now you see a tightening of the loopholes. There's a story here recently by Andrei Zayakin. It says Russia finally sees sharp drop in restricted industrial imports, propping up its military-industrial complex. An analysis by The Insider based on customs data shows that in 2024, Russia imported $7.7 billion worth of industrial goods, down from $11 billion the previous year, while with some categories, particularly electronics, seeing tenfold declines. Even China, Russia's main supplier of manufacturing equipment, is scaling back shipments. At the same time, new supply chains have emerged through the most unexpected countries, including Gabon, Haiti, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
A communist country, by the way.
Yeah, Russia may have localized production or begun importing goods without making declarations, but the broader trend shows that a combination of declining funds and an increased oversight are weakening Russia's military-industrial complex. So
Well,
the restrictions have begun to bite,
yeah.
they say.
Let me interject here. It might be very bad news if the Chinese are cutting back on sending military equipment to Russia, because it may mean that China needs that for their own buildup, which might not be entirely good news for the U.S. The Russians also are scaling up their domestic military production. And I don't think we fully have a handle on that. Their civilian sector is hurting. And I have to be a little bit skeptical. Yes, the Russians are running out of money. They're not paying their workers in many of their industries, but their workers are still going to work. And the Russians are able to suffer deprivations and do things that Westerners wouldn't do. So that is we have to be careful not to underestimate them. But the real way in which we underestimate the Russians, you might ask, why haven't the Russians modernized their army? Because it's expensive, and you have to train a Western army. The training and the specialization is very expensive, and the know-how and everything, and it doesn't work. When the Russians tried to, they saw problems with their army after they invaded Georgia in 2008, August. Remember the 8/8 invasion in August of 2008? They promoted some guys that were going to reform everything, and they ended up getting so many problems and so much, what do you call it? Bad feedback, that they abandoned it. To try to imitate the way that the West did it, they just fell back on the old Soviet way, and they just couldn't do it. It was too expensive. It was too much resistance by the officers and the people that were there. And really, I think that this has been a cycle in Russian and Soviet military history, is that their basic institution, the top-down, that is the centralized control being the ultimate thing, and the people at the top being complete control freaks. They could never give the autonomy. In the German army, if I'm a captain and I'm starting a battle, if I'm somehow commanding a battle involving a battalion and a whole division moves up and the division general comes in, it's the courtesy within the German army in World War II that if a captain starts the battle, the outranking general doesn't intervene and take over. He lets the captain continue to command the battle. That was like part of the ethic. In the Russian army, no, it's like, I don't dare do anything if a guy above me could be offended by me doing it. So they don't have initiative. And so, but how did the Russian strategists and generals, what did they think they were going to do? How were they going to win if they had these problems? Nuclear weapons were the key. They would blast their way with nuclear weapons that would strategically blow the holes in the NATO forces.
I mean, it's like imagine if a Russian general or something of that caliber, right? If he's specialized in specific tasks, he still has to rely on a supply chain and the available tools, but this general doesn't understand these tools, the mechanics of it, what goes into it, and the sourcing of the parts and the bits. So it's like there's we even saw this when new technology came up on the battlefield, and I think the first Iraq war. I don't exactly remember what it was specifically, but there was like a new technological level of reconnaissance, I believe it was. And this was something that the United States high-ranking officers didn't quite fully understand because it was new to them. So back then there was a slight disconnect for a while. Now things, of course, have moved on and progressed a lot. But we look at the Russians, Russian officers and Chinese officers. They're planning for operations, but there needs to be a lot more expertise and planning for supplying this military endeavor, and it becomes so incredibly complicated. Look at this. So it says here, the import of industrial equipment and components is critical to Moscow's production of weapons and continuation of the war. Key imports previously included Taiwanese, Czech, German, and South Korean metalworking machines, precision machines, German drills, Israeli milling cutters, Italian metallurgical lines, Swedish and German coordinate measuring machines, Swiss and American inertial navigation sensors, German alignment lasers, Australian optical processors, Czech waterjet machines, German and American oscilloscopes and signal generators. Of course, the microchips, and then American FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays, Czech industrial furnaces, and on and on and on and on. It's just, and it's like it becomes sort of this daunting task for the Russians to keep supplying, and the Chinese to keep the supply lines for these goods, and it's more complex and more complex and more complex. And if and the
complexity, I should say something about the complexity. You know, it's when you start to look at what 13,000 to 15,000 men is a division in the Western armies. The Russian divisions are smaller, I believe. The complexity, if you look at the table of organization and equipment in a division, you're looking at, wow, it's so complicated, so many elements, communications, intelligence, the different kinds of units, engineering units, supply units. I mean, it's a complicated thing. And now you look at education. In the American Army, a major general commands a division. In the Russian Army, a colonel can command a division or a brigade. We'd have a brigadier general command a brigade, but a major general could command a division in the Russian Army, but a colonel could command a division. And a division commander in the Russian Army and the Soviet Army, they go to school. It takes them 2 years to train, right? You think that's a long time? This is what Colonel Stanislav Lunev told me. You tell that to an American general, and he laughs. 2 years, only 2 years, right? These people are kindergartners. They don't go to school. Their training and their knowledge. I mean, I just sort of look at this stuff from the outside and read a few things, and I'm interested in it, but I'm not an expert on these things. I mean, expertise to know all these military things. But the Russians, compared to the Westerners, they just don't have the same level of sophistication or training. And of course, so when they go into combat, when they start doing things, there's so many things that are missing from their education. And of course, that's why learning in the field is so important. The Russians, one thing you can say about their military is their units are learning. You hope they're learning. I mean, the Russians hope they're learning from being in the field. But I'm not sure what they're learning, because they're dying at such a... You know how many Russian generals have died in the war so far? It's quite a few. And of course, those guys, if it takes years to make them, and you're losing more of them than you can keep up the training with...
Supply chain runs out eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what the age-old advantage of the communist countries, the advantage has always been on the intelligence front. And so now we get more and more cases as the parts and pieces are moving globally, as we just discussed, it's like something really important is happening here and over there and this and on all the supply questions. And then we have the traitors, we have the spies, that can shift advantages and disadvantages and can shift a power dynamic. Now, and now things begin to heat up on a larger scale. There's so many examples of this. Here's one recent example. American intelligence staffer, critical of Trump, charged with seeking to pass classified documents to foreign government. A Defense Intelligence Agency employee was charged with this. He supposedly did this because he didn't agree with the values of the Trump administration, the Justice Department said. Nathan Vilas-Lage, a civilian information technology staffer at DIA, was arrested in Northern Virginia Thursday after a 3-month FBI investigation during which he allegedly left a thumb drive containing classified documents at a public park for pickup by a supposedly friendly foreign government. But this was a sting operation. His messages had been intercepted by FBI agents. An agent had been communicating with him for weeks, posing as a foreign handler after the Bureau received a tip that Lage had offered his services as a spy, according to the Justice Department. And so here's a quote. "The recent actions of the current administration are extremely disturbing to me," Lage wrote in a March email. "I don't agree or align with the values of this administration and intend to act to support the values that the United States at one time stood for." It says he was willing to share classified intel. He didn't seek material compensation, but was seeking citizenship in the foreign country because he didn't expect things here to improve in the long term. So they don't say what country he was trying to sell out to. Canada?
That's pretty crazy.
Was it Canada?
No.
Was it Canada, maybe? Lage.
No, it's Russia. It's probably Russia.
Lage was 28 years old. He was assigned to DIA's Insider Threat Division, which is responsible for identifying employees who could be a risk to national security, and held a top secret security clearance.
Well, those are the people that foreign intelligence want to recruit. Those are exactly the people they target. Yeah, no, there's weaknesses. America's weakness is its intelligence. The Russian strength is their intelligence. The American strength is their combat fighters. The Russian weakness is their combat fighters. And it's hard to, every country has a culture, and that culture comes with advantages and disadvantages. And ours have certain advantages. Our volunteer army and the professionalism and the wealth of our country, that we have the equipment and we have the luxury of training our people. The Russians, being a poor country, they cut corners, and then they have their centralized command, where they have the control freaks at the top in the Kremlin wanting to have control over everything. The Chinese, by the way, do have a non-NCOs. They are developing non-commissioned officers. The Russians they still, in the middle of this war, I haven't heard that they're doing anything, and that's a major failing of their army. But again, they want that control from the top, and they want they think of nuclear
and we saw
combat.
Especially in World War II, there were so many examples of spying versus the talents of a military officer. For a time when Rommel was highly successful in Northern Africa, the British understood fairly quickly the battlefield reconnaissance that Rommel was doing, and local informers, and having a sort of a spy system in place to help Rommel do his thing. But ultimately, it came to be that Rommel's supplies were running out, especially the fuel, because of British espionage that extended to Italy and other places, so that the British more or less always knew where the next oil tanker or fuel tanker was going to start moving, right? Trying to reach a destination, trying to resupply Rommel's troops and especially his tanks, because Rommel couldn't move without fuel. And so all the military talent in the world, came to an end when the tanks would come to a stop. No more fuel, or you had to move the remaining fuel around, and this would limit your range of operations when you couldn't plan operations in a normal sense because you were running out of fuel, because the tankers for Rommel got sunk. So this is when the battlefield military expertise is against the intelligence expertise. And here's another recent example.
Well, you had the Bletchley Park people with the ultra machine.
Yeah.
They were able to crack the German code. Rommel complained, I think it was in Tunisia, why were the British always anticipating his moves? He had the sense, he realized they knew everything he was doing.
Yeah.
But this is the problem: code breaking, intelligence. What the West excels at is this code breaking. And the satellite intelligence and the aerial reconnaissance intelligence, we're really good at that. We're really bad at the human intelligence.
And also I think that we're in recent wars like in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think that a lot of military planners got frustrated with the intelligence agencies, because you do get sold a lot of bad intelligence or outdated intelligence. When you try to get local sources and informants, and you want them to observe movements and where's ammunition stored, where's something brewing, and it happened so much that the military would decide on an operation. We're going into these houses, we're going into these areas, these compounds, and we just search them. And so the soldiers would break down doors, and they wouldn't find what they were looking for. And it's like it's became such a running theme in these military circles. Well, the intelligence is always bad. Now that's of course an exaggeration, but I think that's it had an influence maybe on a number of military officers when they say, I would rather trust satellite imagery, I would rather trust something I can look at. That seems like definitive proof, right? Instead of running, looking for ghosts and chasing phantoms and just busting down doors for nothing. It's a delicate game. And here's another recent example. The headline is "The Fed Economist Accused of Espionage for Beijing." John Rogers was visiting Shanghai in May 2013, attending a business forum as a Federal Reserve economist, when he first received an email from an alleged Chinese intelligence agent. Rogers says he refused the man's offer to pay him, but they stayed in touch, and later the man invited Rogers to visit China again, all expenses paid. This time, Rogers made the trip, setting off a chain of events that led to espionage charges against him in the US and exposed new details about China's alleged efforts to recruit informants inside US government institutions. Prosecutors allege Rogers handed over sensitive information to Chinese operatives who posed as students and who offered to cover travel expenses to China. Rogers met his Chinese handlers in hotel rooms and in some cases shared internal Fed reports, including information prepared for discussions by the rate-setting Federal Open Market Committee. And on and on and on. FBI officers arrested Rogers in January and found $50,000 in cash at his Washington area apartment, money that his wife said belonged to her. And it's like, with this current outrage over how many Chinese students should we let into the country? How many Chinese, so-called students are supposed to study at Western universities, especially elite universities. I mean, if anybody knows anything about espionage, it becomes a royal nightmare to just handle the sheer volume of these people that come here. And all the places they would meet people and all the things that they would try to initiate, and it's like at some point, I mean, you can, in counterintelligence, you can try to narrow down your focus on the seemingly more important cases and just live with that and just deal with it. You have to come to the realization that you can't catch them all, but at some point, I mean, there must be a larger counterintelligence effort, a larger operation, because eventually you will run out of resources to deal with it all. Because at some point, if a student starts to marry a local and gets citizenship, or there's business ties, or there's friendship ties, or people get permanent residency and then, become nationals and then have children. It's a never-ending nightmare. And it's like they know how America is built, what you can and cannot do, and where the loopholes are, and where the, maybe you can slip through the net. You can maybe slip through the net. And it's like, who goes to these hotel rooms and meets with these Chinese people, right? I mean, it's like, here, prosecutors say Rogers was a logical target for Chinese espionage with an important sounding title at the Fed and a growing affection for China. In 2018, he married a Shanghainese woman whom he met through a Chinese matchmaking service. FBI agents would later
really ridiculous.
Find a note on.
Yeah, Americans are very naive. Going back to the beginning of what you said about intelligence failures, it isn't just human intelligence where the failures occur. It occurs in the moods and the delusions, the self-delusions that can prevail, the groupthink that can prevail among groups of officers. And, we have Pearl Harbor, and of course we've got the commanders at Pearl Harbor, the Army commander, General Short and Admiral Kimmel, who both got themselves surprise attacked by Japanese First Air Fleet and devastated both the Army Air Force and the the battleship fleet at Pearl Harbor. That was the intelligence existed to indicate if anyone had put it together, and some people in Washington at the last minute were putting it together, or rather just outside Washington, and there's a whole story about that. But another story involving the Battle of the Bulge we talked about earlier, very famous story. There was an intelligence colonel for U.S. First Army, which was part of the U.S. 12th Army Group that was fighting the Germans at the time. They had just finished the Battle of Hurtgen Forest. There was only one guy. He was a Colonel Dixon, Monk Dixon, who looked at all the information about what the Germans were doing. All the intelligence said, "Oh, they're going to launch a big offensive. They're not done. They're going to hit us hard." And all the other intelligence people within 12th Army Group were telling the commander, General Omar Bradley, and the Army commanders in that Army group were saying, "Oh, no, Dixon's crazy." And Dixon had made one previous false prediction. He predicted that the SS was dissolving or being changed over to the Army or something. He got that wrong, and that they said, "Oh, no, he gets things wrong." But they were all optimistic. They said, "We won the war. We took Paris. The German army's disintegrating. They don't have the wherewithal to do anything anymore, right?" When two full Panzer armies were about to hit them, one was an SS Panzer army. They were going to get smashed. And Dixon was right. Alone, one guy had understood what the Germans were about to do in December 1944. All the rest were wrong. I mean, that is an amazing story, how everybody can be wrong but one guy, right?
Yeah.
Because why? Because we lose our perspective. There's groupthink. And the interpretation, you could put an optimistic, "Oh, that doesn't mean that that's a buildup. That's fake. The Germans are tricking us. They don't have the strength." This is the same thing when we're looking at what the Russians are doing on the NATO border. "Oh, they're just bluffing. Oh, they're not really going to go in. They'd never use nuclear weapons," right? This is what the groupthink is right now. They'd never use nuclear weapons. Putin is just bluffing. They don't have any tanks left. Well, it turns out they do. And it turns out they've been building all this infrastructure. And it turns out they've got more air units than we thought they did. And when people are, there's a recent report, Lee Wheelbarger was saying, they were saying, "Oh no, all those Russian bombers stacked near Finland, they're all being used for spare parts. Look, the doors are open, their engines are removed, blah, blah, blah." Well, it turns out the engines on those, because the climate, it's humid, they have to open up the engine doors so satellite sees it. They're not removing the engine, they're airing it out to keep from the humidity building up inside. And yet, so you see, there's different ways to it. There's an optimistic way, they're removing them for spare parts. And there's the pessimistic view, "Oh no, they're just airing out the human," right? Which is true. Which one of these two things is true? And that's where you get a Dixon who says, look, they're going to hit us. And then all the others saying, Dixon, you're full of beans. They've lost the war.
Here's the next thing. Very, very recent. Secretary General of Finnish Parliament suspected of treason over disclosing state secrets, potential data leak to Russia. Now, it's more complicated than that. This is just one of the scenarios. So just everybody be careful before you jump to any conclusions. Antti Peltari, Secretary General of the Finnish Parliament, is under investigation for suspected treason. Authorities suspect Peltari of disclosing state secrets. The allegations relate to Peltari's previous role as director of the Finnish Security Intelligence Service, the SUPO. In a post on X, Peltari stated that the investigation concerns claims that he failed to act on the fact that retired SUPO employees continue to have access to confidential intelligence data. At a minimum, he is suspected of negligence. Peltari denies any wrongdoing. So basically, they're using older agents, and they don't have access. They're not allowed to have access to current intelligence, but they're still getting that access. Question is, why? Is there a good reason for it? Is there a bad reason for it? We don't know at this point.
Yeah.
According to
we're going to find out in the memoirs years from now.
Yeah.
We won't know what really is going on. That's how it works.
According to the Finnish media, SUPO's counterintelligence division had for years used retired agents on a voluntary basis to help manage the agency's human intelligence network. These former officers collect sensitive information, including intelligence on Russian activities, and pass it on to active agents. The issue is that retirees lacked official clearance to access classified materials. And there was a cyber attack against one of these retired but still active agents. So he was doing things, but then his system was broken into. According to a newspaper, the attack was carried out by Russian actors, and the retiree's computer was compromised, resulting in classified information falling into unauthorized hands. Peltari was elected Secretary General of the Finnish Parliament in late 2023, assumed office at the start of 2024. Now, maybe there were the best intentions behind this. Maybe they thought, well, we know that SUPO is infiltrated, but we trust these retired guys. We fully trust them. We trust them more than the current guys. So let's just outsource some of the stuff to the retirees. So maybe that was the idea behind it, but maybe there was a malicious intent behind it, or maybe it was gross negligence behind it. But it shows that there is, in the intelligence world, not everything is according to the books sometimes, and especially in Europe. Europe is a very, very secretive, chaotic place, right? And it's like when you have government directing the intelligence services, and we know that political parties here are infiltrated by Russian services. What do? It's like you can fail with any sort of, or succeed with any sort of strategy here. You do everything by the books, or you do almost nothing by the books, or you do some things by the books. It's really, really difficult. And here's another thing. This is about the latest, what we know about the so-called Havana syndrome. New evidence links the GRU's assassination unit to mysterious attacks on U.S. officials and their families. So striking at the families, striking at the heart of America's apparatus, and
that's a big violation of basic rules of warfare. And
trying to do it silently, not claiming ownership, not leaving behind any traditional traces. So this was a collaboration from The Insider, 60 Minutes, and Der Spiegel from Germany. And so Havana syndrome the so-called Havana syndrome may have an origin in the
You might
use
want to
of
explain to the listeners what Havana syndrome is.
directed energy weapons. So you can use all kinds of
It's directed at the brain, right?
yeah, you can find devices, make these devices, aim them at people, aim them at their offices or where they live or on the street or whatever. You can target them, and you fire this electromagnetic radiation or some other kinds of waves. You fire these things at a person, and over time or even quickly, you can cause damage in that person's body, especially in the person's brain. Mm-hmm. And it becomes incredibly difficult to determine later on what is wrong with this person. Where does this damage come from? Is it real? Is this person a hypochondriac? Is this person aiming for early retirement, getting benefits because he can't work anymore? And so it becomes like this big mystery. And so all these journalists, they pool together their resources and their expertise, and they say it's all linked to Unit 29155, an assassination and sabotage squad of the GRU, Moscow's military intelligence service.
Interesting. So it's the Russians again. We're getting near the end, and there's a couple things I want to mention to the listeners who've hung in this far, a little snack for them, and then I can ask you a question. I've got information, just got it before the show, from a source that in Israel there is the rumor among certain circles that an attack on Iran's nuclear infrastructure will begin Sunday night. We're broadcasting this, or we're recording this on Saturday, so this might be put up on Sunday. So that's being expected. Pete Hegseth, speaking in Singapore, has made a statement, an interesting statement. We're not going to sugarcoating it. The threat China poses is real and could be imminent, and says we will support the Asian countries against China. And of course, this is a significant statement. He says, quote, some of the claims are completely fabricated about the Chinese delegation accusing Hegseth of making groundless charges against China. The Chinese, of course, are denying that they have aggressive military plans. He says some of the claims against him are fabricated, distortion of facts, and it's not a matter of crying stop thief. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, what is the reaction in Germany to the idea that they're going to deploy so much of the German army to the Baltic states? Is there any public reaction?
Well, right now, I mean, Germany is at a crossroads. I mean, we have to redefine who we are, and when we deploy these soldiers, to that distance, which is not that great. It's still a large psychological distance, because the idea of having combat.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. How are the Germans? They're not really relating it. They're not.
No, it's
really
it's almost inconceivable. It's almost inconceivable to a German nowadays to have combat on our soil. So the idea of sending soldiers further east, that's okay with people. I mean, that's something that they can live with, and they understand the importance of stopping the Russians early, before they come here. So
it doesn't. They don't think they're uncovering Germany. That now, if they break through in Poland, there's nothing in Germany to stop them. There's no second line.
Well, I mean, Germans are still kind of thrifty. They mean, especially the slightly older Germans. I mean, anything like 40 and above. I mean, they can they always have this German perception of we can improvise if we have to. I mean, we can mobilize things if we have to, and
What
the
is
moment
the German reserve? Well, how big is the German reserve armed forces that they could call up? Is it another 100,000 men?
I don't remember the exact.
80,000
I don't
more?
remember the exact number. However, they have these programs in place for quite a while, where government military people, they have these these skeleton support units, and they can fill up the ranks of these support units, and they can when things become serious, there's like this we Germans, we will remember what we can do on short notice. And so it's like there's secret stockpiles of assault rifles, and there's so many people that still went through military training. I mean, it's like they're not as in shape anymore. They don't maybe remember the very detailed specifics of their former military training, because it was compulsory for decades. But there's still lots of people who do remember it, at least the basics of it, and people who can shoot, and it's like most men above a certain age, they had this compulsory military training, and the law still states if you are below 60 years of age, you can be called upon to fight. The government can order you to be a soldier, or to have play some sort of a role in a military campaign. So, I mean, is it possible to mobilize a couple of million people? Yes, absolutely. Can we equip them with the basic necessities? Absolutely. Can we equip them with gear and vehicles and just materials and stuff? Yes, absolutely. I think it's like in part we had all the sabotage and political sabotage, but at the same time, there were always forces in Germany who would do things in secret, and they would prepare things in case of need. So there's all kinds of stuff going on. And it's like one of the oldest principles of warfare. Sometimes it's preferable to appear much weaker than you are. If you almost in a symbolic fashion, you let the barracks become run down, you mess up a project here and this and that, and it all seems so run down, but there's other stuff going on that nobody's supposed to see. So
am I right in saying that the German army has 2 panzer divisions now, and I think there's 5 heavy brigades, half a light brigade, and 27 reserve brigades that are not mobilized, or most of them aren't do you know how mobilized the German army is now?
Well, the tanks is an issue, obviously. But we still have these. We still can retrofit older tanks.
Yeah.
The base units of tanks, and it's like when it's all European Union army anyway. I mean, they stopped talking about. I think it was about 2009, 9 when the Russians became more active. I think this is around the time when the European Union basically stopped using these terms, European Union Army, probably for strategic reasons. And they said, well, the Germans are doing their thing, they're doing their thing, blah, blah, blah. But it's all integrated. It's all interlocked. So, the Germans, they will do their thing, but they will understand, especially through public announcements and propaganda in the whole context, they will understand that it's a European effort. So finally, you can focus on a defense task, but it's not just us. It's not just Germany is doing something, on its own, but it's like this collaborative effort, and that makes a huge psychological difference. I mean, it's like if that's where the game is, if that's where the in a weird way the excitement is and the purpose is, people are gonna flock to it. If this is like the new big thing, if this is when men all over the place will say, you know what, I work a stupid office job, and it's, to make products that nobody really needs, and it's like I felt for so long that I have no real purpose, and I just I want to do something else. I think a lot of men would get into training, or would get back into training, and it's it's a German thing, it's a psychological thing, and some things you just cannot make disappear over time that much. It's still kind of there. This is
I believe that the German army has the 1st and 10th Panzer divisions, and I'm not quite clear on the way the rest of it is organized. But, I think Wheelbarger says that he thinks they have 8 brigades currently deployed, and 1 is in the Baltic states, and 7 are called to go there. But with 27 reserve brigades, I wonder, and they're talking about conscription now in the German government?
Sure. I mean, it's like they don't know quite yet how to announce this. I mean, they're waiting for the Russians to make the next move, because once the Russians make the next move, go into the Baltics, whatever, that's the moment when things fall into place, when they can announce a new service. But there's always the baseline service. If it becomes really necessary for the survival, for security, you can be drafted unless you're older than 60 years.
But as the Germans are going to allow their missile to be used in unlimited range that could hit Moscow from Ukraine, they're giving these missiles to the Ukrainians. This was the occasion of Putin threatening Berlin, threatening nuclear war against Germany. And that was just this past week, these threats from the Russians. Was there any reaction to these threats on Germany?
Surprisingly, that went by without a big splash. The announcement by the Russians, or the counter announcement by the Russians,
because the Russians were mad that the Germans are giving these missiles.
Yeah, but the Russians are always mad. See, that's the thing when they talk about nuking us every week, and they've done this for years on end. And it's always like yeah, nuclear war. So at some point it works against Russian interests, because people will resign to the fact that, yeah, it is what it is, and everybody has a plan until they get hit in the face. So even when the Russians think they have a plan, we make our plans, and then we hope for the best, it's like there's like this, also these little secrets in Germany. You see all these videos on social media, these sort of meant to be funny, quirky videos on social media. It's about Americans living in Germany. And they find it so funny that we build our houses in a specific way. We have these huge, thick cinder block walls. We usually don't make our houses out of wood, which is a very efficient and interesting way to make houses. But for some interesting reason, we build our houses like bunkers. These giant cinder blocks, concrete reinforced, blah blah blah. There's a security aspect to it, in terms of urban warfare. Because the centers of Germany are what's important for in any sort of war scenario. Urban warfare gets complicated by all these concrete structures everywhere,
right?
Because there's cover everywhere.
Is that a feature of the Cold War, where Germany was on the front line and would have been hit first in the war during the 70s and 80s? Was that the reason they started building that way?
Well, they avoided making...
Or was it the experience of World War II, where they got bombed and everything made out of wood burned?
After World War II, the Germans avoided... The Germans avoided doing the same thing that was done in, let's say, Finland and in the Nordics, where they would build more bunkers in Switzerland, more bunkers, better bunkers for most of the population and all that. So the Germans would say, no, we're not making many bunkers. We're just we don't want this attention. But they would build all these structures, these steel reinforced concrete everything, and these huge parking garages and these underground structures, and it's
Where people
built.
could hide,
It's over
take shelter.
everything is over engineering. I mean,
Uh-huh.
even this place I live in. I mean, the walls are like this.
Are you in a basement?
This is a basement, yeah, and it's like
Yeah. Wow.
it's all steel reinforced concrete and a specific type of cinder block. We cut it on the very top. We cut a new window into the wall, and it took us a while because it's like these massive crazy cinder blocks of and so this is how they all built these houses and these structures and parking garages and multi-level structures. It's a lot more than what it appears to be on the surface. So this is kind of
Wow.
a way to protect the population and not make it so obvious.
Yeah.
And if ever an invading force or an insurgency force try to do something here, it would be a nightmare of epic proportions. This would be somebody else's Stalingrad this time, because it's like, how do you deal with this? You know, you can make tiny holes into a wall and have a sniper's nest, and it's like it's all IEDs and snipers and rockets and javelins, and it's a complete nightmare.
So the 27 Land Guard brigades will have wonderful places in towns and cities to hold up, and there's no way that the Russians will get through, or it will be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's so much that doesn't meet the eye. There's so much that's kept out of the public, and and it's when you get an enemy to be overconfident, or when you get an enemy to show his hand, and when you get them to overextend. I mean, this is
So
the
when-
European
when-
game.
when-
This has been
When
played.
when Trump says that Putin is absolutely crazy, threatening Germany and these other countries, it is pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, but what does Trump mean, or what is the subtext when Trump says, "Oh, Putin is crazy"? For me, it means Putin is vastly overestimating his capabilities.
He's not a taco.
He's lost touch with reality. He's cringe. He's much weaker than he thinks he is. It's irrational. Putin is not powerful. It's silly. It's futile. There's so many things that go into some of these statements by Trump, even when Trump is just being himself, because he's been doing this to people his entire life. He tries to get under other people's skin. And he knows that other people want to be seen as important and dominant and aggressive and this, that, and the other. And so when Trump says something like this, I mean, even when Trump says something more nice about Russia, and it always has, I mean, to me, maybe I'm reading into it, but it always has the subtext of, yeah, well, the Russians need us to be nice. You know, they really need us to be nice. And this aggravates the Russians, because they say, no, we don't need anybody's, compliance. We don't need anybody's permission. We don't need anybody to be nice with us and grant us something and lift sanctions or whatever. We want to be the people that do what we want. This is the Russian way. And when Trump says, it's silly what they're doing. It's stupid. It's unnecessary. It's not a grand plan. There's not a grand plan behind it. It's just cringe, really. And okay. I think this is maybe even intended to lead to more bad decisions on the Russians. On the Russians.
Yeah, they've made a bunch, it seems to me, and they can make it worse. They could destroy Europe with this kind of thing. So anyway, I wanted to thank everybody for being with us. This is Jeff Nyquist. This has been Friends and Enemies, and freewheeling discussion with myself and Alex Benesch in Germany. And I want to thank you guys for joining us, and hopefully you'll join us next week.